Have you ever stopped to think about the real environmental cost of, well, everything around us? We're always hearing these huge abstract numbers about climate change, gigatons, global averages, massive industries. And honestly, it can feel so big, it's almost impossible to really grasp. But what if we could? Today, we're going to do just that. We're going to break down that enormous picture piece by piece and connect the huge global scale of emissions right down to the choices you and I make every single day. Just take a look at this. This is the engine of our world, right? We've got factories, trains, planes, all the stuff that powers our lives. But behind all this incredible complexity, there is a massive hidden cost, a carbon footprint so gigantic it's hard to wrap your head around. So let's start peeling back the layers and actually figure out what that cost is. Okay, so first things first, we need to establish the sheer scale of the challenge we're talking about. We're going to look at the total emissions from every single country and every industry to get one single, frankly, mind-boggling number that defines our annual global footprint. So what's the headline number? Well, every year, humanity is responsible for a record high of 57.7 gigatons of CO2 equivalent. Now, a single gigaton is a billion tons. So yeah, this figure is almost incomprehensible. But before we break it down, what does that little E on the end of CO2e actually mean? Okay, so CO2e, or carbon dioxide equivalent, is basically a universal ruler for measuring climate impact. See, not all greenhouse gases are created equal. Methane, for instance, is roughly 28 times more potent at trapping heat than carbon dioxide over a 100-year period. So CO2e is just a handy way to convert all those different gases into one single comparable number. And you're going to want to remember this because this idea becomes absolutely crucial in a few minutes, especially when we start talking about the food we eat. So we have this massive number, 57.7 gigatons. Where does the vast majority of it come from? Now, the answer probably won't surprise you, but the sheer scale of it just might. A massive 76%, 3/4 of all greenhouse gas emissions come from one primary source, burning fossil fuels. It's not even a close race. This is, by a huge margin, the single dominant driver of climate change, and it powers nearly every part of our global system. And when we look inside that giant 76% chunk, the breakdown is pretty revealing. Two sectors in particular really stand out. First up, generating electricity and heat. That alone accounts for 39% of total global emissions. And second, transportation, moving ourselves and all our stuff around the planet, that makes up another 21%. Together, they are the two biggest pieces of the entire fossil fuel pie. All right, let's zoom in on that transportation piece, because this is where those huge global numbers start to connect directly with our daily lives, from our morning commute to our summer vacations. Right now, there are about 1.3 times billion gasoline-powered passenger vehicles on the world's roads. Think about that for a second. Each one, on average, is pumping out about 4.6 tons of CO2 every single year. That is an incredible number of individual tailpipes, all adding up to one massive global total. So how does this actually play out in a daily routine? Let's say a 10-kilometer commute to campus or to work. Well, the difference between how you get there is huge. Driving a car by yourself, by far the most carbon-intensive option. Taking a bus cuts that down significantly, and a train or light rail, that's even better. It just goes to show that your daily choice of how to get around has a direct, measurable impact. So daily commutes are one thing, but what about those bigger trips? For holidays or to go see family? This is where the carbon cost can just skyrocket. And specifically, we need to talk about flying. Okay, this one is a big one. A single round-trip flight from Calgary to London generates about 3.6 tons of CO2 equivalent per passenger. Now, to put that in perspective, that one vacation flight emits nearly as much CO2 as the average gasoline car does in an entire year. It's that combination of super long distances and emissions released way up at high altitude where they have a more potent warming effect that makes aviation so incredibly carbon intensive. All right, let's shift gears from how we move to what we eat, because this is another huge part of the emissions story, and it's one that, surprisingly, often flies under the radar. Nearly a quarter, a full 24% of all global greenhouse gas emissions come from food, agriculture, and waste. And this is where that CO2 equivalent metric we talked about becomes so important, especially when you start accounting for really potent gases like methane. Okay, wow, this slide is fascinating. So let's just take a moment with it. It shows the carbon footprint for producing 1 kilogram of different foods. Just look way, way up at the top. Beef from a beef herd clocks in at almost 100 kilograms of CO2e. And notice that huge gray bar? That's just the methane. Now let your eyes drift all the way down to the bottom. Root vegetables, apples, nuts, they're all under half a kilogram. The difference isn't just large, it's a factor of over 200. It's staggering. To really drive that point home, look at this side by side. It's so clear. 1 kilogram of beef creates 100 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. 1 kilogram of beans, just 2 kilograms. So the crucial point here is that the type of food we choose to eat can have a difference of 50 times in its climate impact. 50 times. And you might be thinking, oh, this is all just about methane from livestock, but it's not. And the source material makes this critical point. Even if you completely ignore methane, the land use, the water, the energy required for many animal products gives them a footprint that is often more than 10 times higher than plant-based alternatives. So we've gone from 57.7 gigatons all the way down to a plane ticket and a dinner plate. We've seen how these massive global systems are ultimately made up of billions of individual actions and choices. Ultimately, our whole journey from the global to the personal really highlights 3 key areas where our choices have a significant and measurable impact on that huge number we started with. How you get to work or school every day, how you choose to travel over long distances, and, of course, what you decide to put on your plate. So we've unpacked all this data, from the biggest picture down to the smallest detail. The numbers don't just tell a story, they show us where we have leverage. So the final question is really for you. Now that you know where the biggest impacts lie, which choices resonate the most in your own life? It's definitely something to think about.